So at this point, I've used over 300 million tokens using Composer1. You can see here 256 million tokens from last month, and this month I'm at 52 million tokens, and I've spent about $100. So I wanted to walk you through some of the things that I have learned along the way. I do think Composer1 is still my favorite go-to model. It's fast, and most of the output's pretty accurate. I do have some fallback models that I use once in a while when like Composer1 cannot figure out the bug. So GPT-5 Codex High Fast is one of my fallback models, and then also Gemini 3 Pro I've been using a lot, and it's actually pretty accurate and a lot cheaper. But my point is that often when you're using Composer1, you still have to fall back on other models, and I think having an IDE that allows you to be able to switch through all these models is something that you should be aware of. Now, before I dive into things I've learned along the way with Composer1, I do want to point out I have an agenticjumpstart.com course where I have a bunch of videos that teach you about agentic coding, how to become better at prompting, how to become better at context engineering, how to really utilize these tools to become a 10x developer and really expedite your ability to ship code fast. So if you guys are interested in learning more about agentic coding and getting on the bandwagon, because a lot of companies are starting to expect their employees to use AI, definitely join the mailing list. I'll have this course ready hopefully by the end of this year. So in my game right now, I might even say that 90% of all the code that exists in my code base, and I think we're at 40,000 lines of code right now. In fact, I can just go here and say like count lines, and we have 42,000 lines of TypeScript. And I've only worked on this for like a couple of weeks, maybe like a month or so. And most of this was coded using agentic coding. Now, the key with agentic coding is that you still have to be in the driver's seat. Like you have to be the director of the agents, and the agents will just go through and modify your code. So if you prompt it very poorly and you don't know what you're talking about, you're not going to get good results. And the one thing I found Composer1 really amazing at is quickly refactoring a lot of code. So for example, if we look through these extensions, let's just click groupable. You'll see that I'm modifying a serialized object here, and I do .get on it. But there's no type safety here. So like I don't even know what fields exist. And it would be nice that when I define a new groupable thing, I could have maybe a type that I can pass in here, or a type that I could pass in here, where I could define what values should exist on this. And I think we can derive that using TypeScript by this initial state that we're passing. Notice that this extension extends extension base, and it passes in an initial fields, and this is passed into a serialized fields, so that later on when you try to access a serialized fields object, it should already kind of know about, you know, what the types are. So I'm gonna go ahead and just drag this one in. I'm gonna drag this one in. And with Composer1, I like to start simple just to kind of get a proof of concept going. And we're gonna go ahead and prompt this to make the type safety a lot better. I want to improve the type safety when it comes to extensions in the extension base. For example, look at the groupable in the initial state we pass on line 13 where we pass in the group object. Later on line 17, it doesn't seem like I get any type safety to know what existing serialized fields exist on the extension. I would hope that I have some type auto-completion when I do get and I do a string. I should be able to see that it has a list of all the different serialized fields that are available on the extension. Can you please refactor just this extension to support better type safety? You probably need to use generics. Okay, throw that in so it has like a little bit more guardrails. And that's something I found along the way with all LLM prompting is like you have to know what you're asking for. If you don't know what TypeScript generics are, is basically these things that you put like, and you can pass in additional things. So we're gonna go ahead and kick this off. Okay, so this is done. What I like to do is just kind of look through the changes. You'll see here, it did pass in a generic like I kind of asked you, and we can define what the type is here. Maybe doing some type of inference might have been better. So like we don't have to actually pass that in. We could probably infer what this is, but now let's just go ahead and test this out. If I do that, I do get the auto completion with groups. So this is a little bit better, right? And if I go to extension base, let's go to extension base real quick, and let's see how it modified this file. So basically this takes in now a generic, and that gets passed to the serialized fields so that it knows what the initial fields are, and then it added types to all the different methods so that we can easily get the type safety when we need to basically get things from the serialized field. It made some changes to the vector stuff. I'm not sure if I really even wanted it to do that, but I think it's fine. And then also it made a change to the serialized field class. So if I open that up, you'll see that this takes in a generic now. And now all of the get and the set methods have those type safety already set up. So this refactoring I could have done just by doing tab completion, or like if I really wanted to handcraft the type safety and the generics, I probably could have gotten this done. But I guess I want to show that using Composer1 can just crank it out. Now, the real great thing about this is I started with an initial prompt, and so this context window has information about how it made it better with the type safety. So now I can click and drag this whole folder. Now, please apply this change to every single extension in my code base, and I can kick this off. And honestly, I'm just going to sit here and let it do its thing because I want to show you how fast it can kind of go through and just refactor all my code. Okay, you can see it go through basically one file every like 1 or 2 seconds. And after about 20 seconds of waiting, it literally just refactored all my extensions to be able to pass into these generics. And now I have a nice type safety. And in the future, when I do prompt to add more extensions into my game, it's probably going to use the existing patterns that I have, and the code's just going to be better overall. Okay, so this is by far like the #1 reason I use Composer1 is that often the LLM does generate slop. Not just Composer1, but all LLMs will generate slop unless you guide it properly. And having something that can quickly refactor and fix the slop that was generated is game changing in my opinion. So let's go back and make sure that this game still works. I'm gonna go ahead and just do a refresh here, and we should be able to walk around. We can still shoot. Looks like everything's working how it did before. And I'm telling you, when I say I use Composer1 for basically adding every feature, I'm talking about the item system, the inventory system, the mini map over here, the resource system, the crafting system, the buy menu, the scrolling in this, to be able to like navigate with the mouse. Literally, I just been prompting my way to a working solution. And I guess the main takeaway from this is that before, you'd have to spend a lot of time up front making sure that what you're building is like solid, because coming back later and refactoring it is a pain. It's a very tedious process. It's going to take you a lot of time. If you're not fast at using your IDE or coding, it's going to be a slow, tedious process like I mentioned. But with Composer1 and these models, as they're getting faster, it's just a single prompt. And so you can do experimentation with how you want your interfaces to look or how you want your components to be. And if you don't like it, you just refactor it, you wait 20 seconds, and now you have a completely different approach to whatever you need in your code base. The second thing I can kind of demo with Composer1 is just very fast at ideation as well. So like right now, there's only a certain amount of items you can craft in this game. I think adding some more might be pretty interesting. Let's just go ahead and ask it, what are some items you think I should add in to be craftable in this game? You can also suggest new items that you think would be really cool to have in this survival zombie game. I think the main thing I'm kind of like demoing is just the speed of it. I don't want to have to sit around waiting for an LLM to get back to me. I just want to be able to ideate very fast and then like prototype with the Composer1 model. Okay, so going through here, there are some interesting ideas. There is a barbed wire system. That might be pretty cool. Alarm system. I don't think that's really necessary. A watchtower, high ground advantage, a storage box, a Molotov cocktail. Oh, that one might be pretty cool. 1 gasoline, 1 cloth. Let's actually add that one. I do like that idea. So can you please add in a new item called a Molotov cocktail? And I need it to kind of act like a grenade where a user can throw it, and then it goes for a certain distance, and then it explodes, leaving flames all over the grounds. This is an item that can be craftable with 1 gasoline and 1 cloth, and when you craft it, it'll create 2 Molotov cocktails. Now let's see how this does. We should probably tag grenade like this, and I'm going to tag grenade here as well, just so it has an idea of like what a throwable item is. Make sure you remember to register this entity in both the client and the server so that it will show up properly. Make sure you deserialize and serialize the information properly, and also make sure you use and update the weapon config so that it'll show up as a particular weapon in the buy menu and other things. Now, often I like to tag the files, but sometimes I'm lazy and I just kind of like go with the prompt. If you are very descriptive in your prompt, and often I like to name the files so that it's going to be successful when the LLM does a grep over your code base. One thing you'll see is that it does greps over your code base. So if your files are named properly, when it does a find or a grep, it should hopefully find the files that are relevant and then just add in the feature with very, very little issue. I will say that often a larger prompt like this, I might have even done a plan mode. I have found plan mode kind of makes it a little bit more successful. Often with doing a larger prompt, it may miss 1 or 2 things, and you have to come back and just reprompt it saying, hey, you broke this, or hey, this isn't working. But for a small feature like this, I have a feeling it's going to one-shot it. And the main takeaway from that prompt, as you notice, is very long and it's very descriptive. I kind of told it, hey, like make sure you remember this, that, and the other, because I've used this enough where it will forget things. So like the more you just put the guardrails on, or even have a markdown file that explains exactly how to add an item, which I do have some stuff over here. For example, I have adding inventory light items, and that'll walk the LLM through how it can add an item. Now, these things do go out of date quickly if you're doing a lot of refactoring in your code base. Okay, so we're back in the game. Let's just test out to see if we have access to the Molotov cocktail. It does show down here, so we need to get 1 gasoline and 1 cloth. I may just spawn a gasoline. It'll be a little bit easier. So let's spawn a gasoline, and let's spawn a cloth like this. Here we go. Pick those up. And then we can craft it, and now we have 2 Molotov cocktails, and they blow up, and we have fire. I'm able to add in a brand new item or a brand new feature just by a single prompt. And like when I'm really in the zone, I can kick off multiple of these things if I have a good idea about what items I want to add in. And it just basically cooks. Like this is so fast on iterating and prototyping Now, the great thing about adding an item is that most of the code that it added is probably just a copy and paste using the existing structure that I have in my code base. And so if you know that your groundwork, your foundation is good, you can kind of trust the output of the LLM. Like, I would highly doubt any of this stuff is going to have slop in it. But if you are trying to add in a brand new thing inside your game engine or your backend system that it's never seen before, it's probably good to go and make sure you very, very thoroughly review the code, because it does still generate slop. Every LLM generates slop. So you got to be very, very careful with that in accepting code. But as you can tell here, it added this thing in one shot. So what I would actually probably do as well is I'm going to ask it to document what it just did. Can you please create a thorough MD file to document all the things you had to change to add in a throwable weapon? Now, I really enjoy adding these MD files so that later on when I want to prompt for a new weapon, I don't have to like make such a detailed prompt. I can just click and drag this MD file, and then I can say, hey, now add me a rocket or something, add me a throwable knife. Okay, so you can see here we have this markdown file that basically describes everything that needed to be changed to add that in. And we're going to try to add in one more. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this context file. Can you please add another weapon called the throwing knife, which kind of is similar to the bow and arrow, where once you throw it and you loot the zombie, you can then go back and get your throwable throwing knives. Make this a craftable item using one knife and some cloth. Okay, so again, it's like a craftable weapon. It's using the same markdown that describes how to add in a craftable weapon that's throwable. But then I'm also going to tag in the bow and arrow just so it has like some context of how that stuff kind of works. I think there's also a bow projectile. Let me make sure I have the projectile. Use these tagged files as reference so that you can understand how we add them to the zombie inventory when the zombie gets hit. Okay, so again, let's just kick this off and we'll see how this does. Now, I always like to add in my changes. Every time I do a prompt and it's working, I go ahead and I add them to my stage environment. Sometimes I'll even commit them. I could probably say like adding in Molotov cocktail, and I'll commit this so that we don't lose those changes. And then the throwing knife will basically start getting created over here. Okay, so it looks like there's actually some throwing knives that spawn by us. Let's see if we can actually throw them. It doesn't seem like it. So we'll have to go back and say, like, do we have a knife? Throwing knife ammo. That's kind of weird. Okay, so here's a good example of the LLM not doing what you wanted. And I think one issue a lot of people have with the LLM is they expect everything to be one-shotted with one prompt. That's just not going to happen. You're going to run into these issues where certain things just get missed when it's trying to add in new features, and you have to go back and you have to reprompt it. The second issue is I'm adding an item whose requirements do not truly match the current system that I have in place. Right now, every weapon typically has ammo. Okay, the throwing knife, it's almost like an ammo item, or it's a stackable weapon. So it's a little bit different than ammo because you don't need ammo for the throwing knife. It's just like a weapon that should be stacked, kind of like a grenade, right? So I will say I'm going to copy all this just so it has context. I'll paste it in. I noticed that you added a throwing knife ammo. This is not how I wanted this. I need this throwing knife to act as like a grenade where you have a stack of these in your inventory, and every time you throw one, it's going to make a projectile that when it hits a zombie gets added to the zombie's inventory, and when the zombie gets looted, you can get that throwing knife back. So maybe redesign and rethink how you approach this weapon and actually use a grenade as a reference instead of whatever you used previously. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just reprompt it a second time, and I'm going to give it a little bit more guidance. I'm going to say, hey, like, you should be looking at the grenade because the grenade is actually kind of more of how this works. Now, when you get used to using these models, you'll realize the reason it messed up is because I gave it a context file for the bow ammo, and then the arrow projectile. So I overloaded the context with stuff that was irrelevant to my actual requirements. And so when you get better at using these models, you'll realize when you should or you should not tag certain context. Me tagging the bow and arrow ammo was probably my biggest mistake. I should have just tagged the grenade and said, hey, now create a projectile that's kind of like the arrow projectile. And I guaranteed if I provided the right context from the get-go, I would have one-shotted this feature. But sometimes you mess up the context, you add in the wrong prompt, and you have to redo it. I guess my point is don't expect everything to one-shot. You have to iterate on this stuff. If you're not perfect at giving the context and the prompting, like, you have to iterate. Spawn it. Can I pick it up? Okay, there we go. Picked it up. And then can I throw it at a zombie? I can't throw it. It did crash the server when it hit whatever this is. So we have to go back and try to figure out why that failed. Carryable is not defined. So I'm going to go back and just go here, paste this in. And again, I understand the context of my code base. It hit a item and it tried to like add it in. Can you make sure that the throwing knife projectile will only intersect with zombie types? Right now it hit a random item and then it tried to add it to the item's carryable inventory, but that item wasn't even carryable. And instead of zombie type, I'm actually going to say like enemy group, okay? Because zombie type is very specific. I do have groupings that you can add to zombies. You know, now that I realize I shouldn't have said group enemy, because I think like gasoline, if I go to the game server over here, I think gasoline has a group of enemy. So that doesn't make sense either. So I might actually reprompt this. Actually, instead of doing group enemy, this should only ever be attached to zombie. So look at the air projectile to see how this works. All right, so now let's try this out. I'm going to go and get the knife. And then I also want to spawn a zombie. Let's do this. Pick up the knife. And then I want to make sure I can throw it at the zombie. Okay. Looks like it hits the zombie. I can pick up, I can loot. And I can. It looks like the hitboxes might be a little bit off. I'm not sure what the throwing knife hitboxes is. Can I throw it by the trees? Okay, so they get stuck in the trees. All right, so I'm pretty happy with this. I think the throwing knife is pretty good. We could probably do some minor tweaks and try to make sure that it actually hits the zombies correctly. I think it has like it's like flying through the zombies sometimes. And you have to like aim directly at their feet for some reason. I don't know why. But I'm guessing that the hitbox of the throwing knife is like very small. All right, that's all I want to share with you guys. I just want to give you some good, realistic workflows of like me refactoring code and me adding in new items, because this is literally what I do when I'm working at night on my game. I just prompt additions, and then I'll come back through after a certain amount of time, and I'll just refactor the code, because eventually the code just starts getting bad, and you do have to go through and refactor it. But luckily, Composer1's so fast at doing these refactorings that I'm not too worried about making sure everything's perfect up front. I can rapidly prototype for a couple of hours, and I can come back with another scan through and just refactor the stuff that I find pretty poorly written. If you found this useful, check out my agenticjumpstartcourse.com. I'm building out a full stack web application with the same approach. So we're not going to be doing a game, we're going to be doing a web application. So if you do want to see me building something live, doing agentic coding, and just getting some tips and tricks about how I become more successful at it, be sure to check out my course and join the waitlist. Have a good day and happy coding.